Our next speaker is an independent app developer and photographer. He created Magic Window, Earth Lapse, Tahoe Blue, and Ow My Balls. Josh Michaels.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Let me give you a piece of advice. If you want to be taken seriously in life, don't make a game called Ow My Balls, because it will follow you around everywhere that you go. So yeah, my name is Josh Michaels. I'm an independent app developer. I have to say up front that I'm actually really nervous when I come up to present. It doesn't matter how many times I give presentations or whether I've done it before or not done it before. It's always very anxiety-inducing. And I'm lucky to have my mom here with me today, which just adds slightly to the anxiety level. But I'll try to do my best. But as one of my heroes from Trailer Park Boys, Ricky, says, if I can't smoke and swear, I'm fucked. So we'll see how I can get by today. Can I get a round of applause for my mom? Thank you so much. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't. So my primary work is making a piece of software called Magic Window. On your Mac, it makes it so that you can have desktop wallpaper that slowly changes over time. So rather than just having one beautiful landscape over the course of your day, it'll slowly change between day, sunrise, and sunset. On the iPad and iPhone, this is more relaxation software that you can use to get a kind of mini vacation anytime, anywhere. And we have a whole bunch of various versions of this, including Earth Lapse, which takes photography from the International Space Station and packages that into your iPad and iPhone so you can have a window in space anywhere that you go. So my talk today is going to center around a comment that we hear pretty much every WWDC from Apple. I first kind of saw this tweet from Tim Cook at the 30th anniversary of Mac event a couple of months ago, and he reiterated this point that seems to be so crucial and critical to Apple, that they are still standing at the intersection of technology and the liberal arts. Something about that statement, something about that intersection is so critical to them. And I was actually happy in WWDC this year because they simplified it again to technology and the arts. It's quite hard to explain why the word liberal is attached there. But whether you use the word liberal in there or not, they seem to be implying that there's really this magical place that you can get to create amazing products if you can somehow get to this place where technology meets with all of these other things. But I have always struggled to figure out how to explain to people or even explain to myself what this means or how you even go about getting to this place. The first time that I ever encountered something that I would describe as the intersection was at ACM's Special Interest Group for Computer Graphics. Is anyone here familiar with SIGGRAPH or been to SIGGRAPH conference? Okay, that's fantastic. So I actually encountered the University of Illinois chapter when I was a senior in high school. And it was just this really amazing group of people who just worked on hardcore graphics problems and making really cool visual demos that really did, pull together both the artistic and the technical side. The project that I worked on there that I'm most proud of is a project called Ember, which was a real-time, non-photorealistic painting engine. In simple terms, if I had a Windows machine here, I could show you a rotation around this painting, and you could move into and move out of it. And this is something that I'm still obsessed with and working on more than a decade later. So when I was in SIGGRAPH and I was in college, I felt like I had this opportunity to be at this really magical place and work with really incredible people to make cool things. But of course, after I left, I made this decision to go to Microsoft. And at Microsoft, I really struggled to find the intersection anywhere. It was, from day one of the things that was hardest for me was figuring out how do I actually get people together in this very siloed and very heavily politically structured organization to work in the same way that we so easily worked together when we were in SIGGRAPH. And the first indication that I had that this was not going to be easy is when I worked on a project that was basically a help and support site for MSN. And we'd met as a group a couple times, and I'd been told to kind of go off with the designer and come up with the design for this site. So I spent a couple weeks working with the designer who was assigned to the project. And then we came back and brought this design to the engineer. And the engineer said, well, we can't do this because there's curved edges on everything. You can't have curved edges, you have to have straight edges. And this was at a point in time where it was a little bit more difficult to make curved edges with HTML. But really instantaneously we hit this conflict between a designer or an artist who had this design that involved curved edges on everything, and an engineer who was refusing to implement that design on the basis that it included curved edges. Now, this is where I discovered that developers, including myself, have the superpower that anytime we don't like something or don't want something, we can just say that it's too hard. It's like somebody suggests, hey, I want this feature, and you say, oh, no, that's too hard, that's never going to work. And often it's not that it's too hard, it's just that the developer doesn't really want to do it, because everything developers do is hard, so that applies universally. But further on in life, I was reading some folklore on folklore.org that talks about the history of the development of macOS, and there is a phenomenal story in there called Round Rects Are Everywhere, and I encourage you to read this. It's a story about Steve Jobs and Bill Atkinson, and as the story goes, Bill had just come up with a way to super optimize the drawing of circles and ovals using QuickDraw, which is the underlying drawing technology on the original Mac. And he came into work to show this incredible demo of how fast he could draw circles and ovals. And Steve Jobs came up and said, well, what about rectangles with rounded edges? And the response was, well, that's too hard, maybe impossible, and I don't really think that's even important anyway. So Steve went on to try to convince Bill that this was critical by showing him all of the places in the world where round rectangles existed. And in fact, if you look around you, you very rarely see hard edges. Everything has curved edges to it. And it was ultimately when Steve showed Bill a no parking sign that had curves on the edges that Bill relented and went home to hack away at round rects. And at the end of the day, Bill came back the next day, and he had a super fast implementation of round rects, which is why we have beautiful round rectangles and everything in the Macintosh world today, because if he hadn't done that, then the foundation of Mac wouldn't have given all of us developers the easy way to make these round rectangles. So comparing and contrasting my experience at Microsoft, where we actually weren't able to win the round rects argument, we ended up having to do everything with square edges, to the experience that Bill had with Steve, I really started to wonder, is the round rects argument like something universal? Can you like measure how good your team is or how close you are to the intersection on the basis of how long it takes your team to agree that round rectangles are important? And I did a whole bunch of trying to come up with an algorithm and really struggled, and then eventually it hit me that Microsoft is still fighting against round rectangles even today. And I would have thought that maybe this is in part because Apple has now got a patent on menu screens that have round rects around icons. It's fun and easy to make fun of Microsoft until you recognize that actually Lauren Britcher adopted this style into this wonderful game, Letterpress, just a few months after Microsoft came out with it, which won an Apple Design Award, pretty much the highest that you can expect. And then, of course, there's iOS 7, which continued in this vein. Whether or not that was actually inspired by Microsoft or not, who are we to know? But the point of the matter is here that when engineers and artists come together to try to solve a problem, they can compete against each other in creative tension, or they can kind of bounce off each other in a, I'm refusing to do what you want, I'm refusing to do what you want, and nothing ever gets done. And as someone who has worked as a producer and a product manager in a lot of my jobs, I've had the joy and pleasure of working with some incredible engineers and some incredible artists. And when I made this talk, I sat down to think about, well, what are actually the differences between the engineers and the artists? What is it that these people seem to be in such conflict? Like, what is wrong here? So I made a handy comparison chart here to talk through it. So engineers hack, or they like to do hacks, and they like to make things. Hacking and making are really the terms of the engineering world, where artists create art. Well, these are both creating things. These are both making things. This is not very different. You'll notice that the artist side wanted a different font. It wasn't okay for me to use standard font there. On the engineering side, and I heard this from artists all the time, engineers can be so difficult to work with. They never want to do what I say. They're always telling me that things are too hard, and then doing whatever they want. And but then it's funny because the engineers just complain about the artists that they're also very difficult to work with, and they never come back with the designs that meet specifications. And the complaints are different. What they're complaining about is different, but the essence of it is the same. That both sides tend to be difficult to work with each other. And the more I looked at this, and the more I thought about it, I came to recognize that the more creativity someone is expressing at a given moment, or more so somebody's creative capacity, is directly proportional to how difficult they tend to be to work with. Where the absolute pinnacle, of course, in the upper corner would be Steve. Now, if you were here yesterday and you heard the talk about stables and volatiles, this is pretty much the exact same model. But the essence of it is, look, engineers are very creative people. Artists are very creative people. When they're both doing creative work, there's going to be some degree of conflict, and there's going to be some amount of difficult to work with. It's just something to accept, but it's not something to dismiss. So continuing on this, comparing artists to engineers, engineers, and this is a lot of what I love about engineering, can be quirky and unusual. You always find such an amazing wide variety of people from all walks of life, from all different backgrounds, and we generally have developed an attitude within the engineering world to be very open and just very totally cool with everything that might go on. And while some news and press paints a picture otherwise by picking out some selective people who may have bad attitudes, for the most part, almost every engineer I encounter is a very open-minded individual who is happy and cool with anything that might go on. And it's the same thing on the art side. Artists also tend to be quirky, unusual, unique people. So they also share this in common. So after thinking this through, I really only was able to come up with one thing that I thought was kind of truly different in any way between the people who are more on the art side and the people more on the engineering side. And that is that the engineers tended to be more logical in the way that they thought about things, and the artists tended to be more emotional in the way they thought about things. It's strengths on different sides, but it's a subtle difference. And of course, this comes into the whole idea of two worlds theory, and the right brain is the creative side and the left brain is the science side. And so artists are right brain people and engineers are left brain people. But the thing that's always bugged me about this is that, look, we know what being right-handed and left-handed means, right? Like your right hand is better at some things and or your left hand is better at some things. But if you're right-handed, it doesn't mean that you don't exercise or use your left hand, right? And if you're left-handed, it doesn't mean you don't exercise or use your right hand. It's a subtle thing. Yes, I can't write as well with my left hand, but I still use both my hands all the time. And I think, unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, we started to box people into, if you're an artist, then you're only a right-brain thinker. And if you're an engineer, then you're only a left-brain thinker. And it's so fundamentally false. We're all using all of our brains all the time. And having strength in one side or another, that's great, that's awesome. You've got a superpower because you are stronger in the artistic side or you're stronger in the logic side, but it doesn't mean that you're somehow fundamentally different. So I really believe as an indie, the thing that I love most about being indie is I get to exercise my whole brain all the time. By getting to do and by having to do all aspects of the business, I have no choice but to exercise all parts of my brain, even portions that are like, I don't like doing this part. Well, I don't have a choice, I'm indie. I've got to do that. And that's really what I want to encourage everyone else to do, is to not think about it as I'm a right brain person, or I'm a left brain person, or I'm an artist, or I'm an engineer, but to think about it as exercising your whole mind and trying to grow and get better at all aspects of things, not just the things that you're strong at. Because usually it's better to work on improving the things you're weak at and getting your weaknesses up to par than to just focus 100% on your strengths. So what I personally see emerging today is that the people who are really successful in indie and the people who are ultimately really successful in creating great products are people who blend this together. They're not artists, they're not engineers, they're creative individuals. They are creating by whatever means or whatever mechanisms they feel most comfortable with. They make beautiful things and they blend together both the logical and the emotional, the hearts and the minds. It's not about this split, it's about becoming good at both things. And just to kind of support this notion, I brought in two quotes. First off, from John Romero: "You might not think that programmers are artists, but programming is an extremely creative profession. It's logic-based creativity." I think that really sums it up. Though I found this on a Microsoft promotion, which I don't know what to make of that. The next one is indie extraordinaire Zach Gage, who in a recent talk that I've linked to here made the comment that reality is equal parts art and science. These two disciplines aren't naturally split apart. They've been taken apart because of how we teach them. So I think when you talk to people who are in the creative field, it really becomes apparent that this left-right brain strength, yes, you're stronger in one or another, but they're exercising their whole brain and they're trying to get better all of the time. So in that, I'm speaking about kind of at an individual level what I'm encouraging people to do, to explore art if you're an engineer, to explore engineering if you're an artist. But beyond kind of individual, how do you get these people to work together? Okay, so we become more balanced people, we become more blended, but there's still going to be these challenges of how you get artists and engineers in a room together to be effective folks. And I just want to share with you guys today some of my experiences working with artists and engineers, and at least what I've observed personally as both things that work and things that can be more challenging. So in terms of things that work, small interdisciplinary teams, and when I say small, I mean like 3 to 8 people, seem to be the absolute core of getting people of different disciplines to work together effectively. By putting these people all in one team together, where you've got an iterative and inclusive process where everybody can make comments and provide feedback, where engineers are able to go in and work on art and artists are able to go in and work on engineering. You enable a synergy to happen between all of the people there, where the artists are now learning from the engineers and the engineers are now learning from the artists, and the disciplines all start to blend together until all of your different brains that are maybe stronger on the right or stronger on the left come together to form one big brain which is strong on both sides. So finding the right group of people for that is difficult, but putting them together in this small team structure seems to be the magical gem. And of course, this is an approach that Steve Jobs took with Apple, but he wasn't the one who innovated on this idea originally of small teams within a bigger company. It was actually Walt Disney at Disney Imagineering who first figured out that you could still have these small teams within a big company and get the magic out of these small teams, even though there's a bigger bureaucracy that surrounds them. So having fluid roles for everybody, not saying, you're an artist, so only work on art, you're an engineer, so only work on engineering, that's absolutely crucial. And the more that we learn each other's tools and the more that we adapt our tools to be more compatible with each other, the better off I think we'll all be. So let me talk for a moment about challenging situations now that I've observed in working at the intersection. Teams in silos. Does anybody here work in an organization where you've got like an art team in one silo and an engineering team in another silo? Is that common? Okay, I'm glad that there's not that many because this creates a lot of problems. And the biggest thing that can happen is you start to get different cultures between the art teams and the engineering teams, and you start to have kind of tribalism play out, where the artists and the engineers start fighting not at an individual level, not at a small collaborative level, but at a we're the art team and we're against the engineers, and we're the engineering team, and we're frustrated with the artist, and it really spins out of control quickly. And in situations I've been in with this, I've tried to solve it with virtual teams, but even that can't ultimately overcome the tribalism that happens when you get a group of artists and a group of engineers and they just have one masterful leader who negotiates between them and does all the big politicking. So waterfalls and handoffs are another thing that are a big challenge. And there was a talk earlier this week by Yang that went into this. I encourage you to watch it if you weren't here for it. But it basically points out that if you're in a situation where the artists are spending a whole bunch of time on a design to perfect it before they hand it to the engineers because they think the engineers aren't going to be willing to make changes later, you break away from this iterative process that makes amazing products because the artist can't just iterate directly with the executing product. They're kind of doing everything in their design and then they're seeing that whole design finished as opposed to iterating on it over time. So if your different silos are spending a lot of time doing tons of work and then handing it off and then doing tons of work and then handing it off, you're not really iterating. And iteration is at the absolute heart of great products. And finally, both top-down and consensus-based decision-making seems to be problematic. Consensus-based decision-making, in my experience, results in kind of middle-of-the-road stuff. You need kind of a strong, hey, this is the vision, this is what we're trying to do. But on the flip side, if you get too much of a dictator or too much of a top-down, people start to feel unempowered at the lower level and like they don't have a say in things. So finding a balance there is definitely tough. So as a product person, the one thing that keeps coming back to me over all of the time that I've worked on and thought about product is that at the end of the day, all products are ultimately a reflection of their creators. What you see when you see an app shipped or a product shipped, even if it's out my balls, is a reflection of the people who made it. And I've gotten to a point where I can look at an app that's been created and kind of imagine what the team was behind that creation. And one perfect example of this is Apple Design Award-winning game Monument Valley. And if you have not seen their making of video, they talk to all of the members on the teams about how their teams were set up pretty much exactly how I described, and how the fluid nature of their roles is what made their product so magical at the end of the day. So I look at this and I'm like, this had to be done by a small integrated team. There's no way this was done by a farm of people. But then I look at this and you can imagine really quickly what the team behind this looked like, right? Because when you see the silos and you see the mechanisms start to pop up in a game this way, you can start to imagine that maybe the people who were working on this were working in kind of a similar farm-oriented manner to the product that they ultimately created. So, I really love that this whole idea of looking at products and trying to figure out the team behind them because it can give you a sense of what's working and what's not. So, we've talked about two tensions so far between artists and engineers. We've talked about how there can be challenges with creative personalities, that the more creative somebody is, the more difficult they can be to work with, and putting together a bunch of creative people can create some of those challenges. We've talked about how organizational problems can amplify those tensions, how if you put people in silos as opposed to on small teams, you can end up with holy wars between the silos instead of highly collaborative activity within the small teams. But there's a third point that I want to make today, which I think is one that goes unsaid a lot of the time, and that is that there's a lot of economic tension between the artist side and the engineering side. And we all kind of recognize that under the supply-demand model, engineers are in extremely high demand and thus are very highly compensated for their work. And artists, unless they're very specialized in certain areas, are not in as much high demand. And they're not compensated as well for their work. And you end up with companies where you've got people where everyone in the company is working 80 hours a week. Everyone is giving up their whole life to the company, to the product, but you've got the people on the art side of the house making 1/3 or 1/2 of the amount of money that the people on the engineering side of the house are. And I think this stays under wraps quite a bit because we all know that you never share your salary, right? Because if you share your salary, everything goes wrong. But the reality of the matter is that everybody knows that this inequality is there. When you're working at a game company that's structured like this, you are aware that these people are making way less than these people, even though they're seemingly working just as hard. Now, there's a whole bunch of studies involving primates and inequality of compensation. And without getting too vulgar about this, the best examples are quite simply that you take two monkeys, you give them a repetitive task that's the same for each one of them to do, and you give them a reward after they complete that task. And after some amount of time where they've done this task for a given reward, you then start giving one of the two monkeys double the reward that you give the other monkey. The end result is the monkeys start throwing shit at each other and fighting, because more intelligent monkeys recognize that there's an unfairness to this, and they feel like, hey, equal work, equal pay. This isn't just something that's hippy-dippy made-up stuff. We have a very primal sense of wanting to be fairly compensated for what we do. And when you end up with teams where you've got one silo over here which is undercompensated and another silo over here which is overcompensated, that primal nature is going to come up. And it may manifest itself as politics. It may manifest itself in all sorts of different ways. But that economic inequality is there, and it's hard to escape because of how primal our response is to needing fair compensation and wanting fair compensation. So this whole notion that financial inequality induces primal tensions explains quite a bit of things that I've seen in the world. In fact, one of the things that I think this explains best is the holy war that's going on right now between the makers of premium games and the makers of free-to-play games. So if you read online in the more kind of extreme posts, you've got people who make premium games saying, oh, free-to-play is just a scam and these people are all just cheating. And the free-to-play people are like, what? We're just making games. We just love making games. This is just like our business. Like, what's the problem? And what you've got is groups of people who are both deeply passionate about making games, who are working their butts off to make incredible games, but because of the nature and the structure of the marketplace are being compensated in different ways for it. So it's no surprise when you have one indie who's making a premium game and not making very much money, but doing a great game, and another one who is making really good money off a comparable game that's structured differently, that you'd start to see the technical term is feces getting thrown back and forth between these groups. And I think this is what we see on the forums, and this is what we see with the posts around this topic that have been bubbling up over the past couple of months. So, my observation is that capitalism really struggles with art like it does with happiness. Anything that fits really cleanly into a supply-demand curve can very easily be handled and managed with capitalism and with our economic model, or with socialism even. But there are some things like art which don't cleanly fit into a supply-demand box unless you do limited edition art, which works by waiting until the artist dies, and then you've got a limited amount of their art, and then you pump up the value of that, and lots of people get rich off of it, but not the artist themselves. Did you know that Van Gogh only sold one painting in his entire life? He only sold one painting in his entire life, but his catalog is worth billions, and all of that money went to people who took advantage of the fact that there was now a limited amount of supply and an increased amount of demand to pump up the value of his work. So capitalism struggles to work with art, but art also struggles to work with capitalism, and it's a struggle for its life, because artists need to be able to get some amount of money to get by, no matter how much you make comments about whether it's about the money or not. If you don't have money, you can't make art. And if the only people who have money are the ones who make art, then the only place you get art from is the wealthy, the elderly, and the children. Because it's the people who have lots of money and have time on their hands who can make art, and not people who potentially want to do it for a career. So capitalism struggles with art, but art struggles with capitalism too. And I'd make the observation that part of the challenge is on the art side, because artists, and indie artists in particular as well, tend to make the statement that it's not about the money. It's not about, we just saw this a few minutes ago, right? It's not about the money, I'm not doing this for the money. I'm not doing this for the money either. But if you say it's not about the money, you're pretty much going to not end up with much money. Because if you're not paying attention to it and you don't care, then you can't be surprised when you don't get a lot of money. It's just really, really simple. But I struggled with this for a really long time, because in my whole life, everything I've created, it's never been about the money. But as an indie, I slowly started to realize that if I wanted to have the resources that were necessary to make truly great things, I was going to have to pay attention to this, and I was going to have to figure out a way to be comfortable with money at the same time that I'm making apps. So I'll wrap up quick. I started a few seconds late. I want to take a quote from Andy Warhol, and this really changed my attitude about it. Being good in business is the most fascinating kind of art. Good business is the best art. And you think about that from Warhol's perspective, he was able to build a factory producing his artwork, which then brought back money in to create all sorts of other artwork. So his art business ended up inspiring and creating a substantial amount of additional art. And Andy Warhol, by the way, was also a tech artist. He was one of the earliest people making artwork with computers. This one may look familiar with you. The Carnegie Museum of Art is creating a film called Invisible Photograph and a whole exhibition around this work. So, I hope that artists can be inspired by Warhol's perspective on this. I think it's important to take a more balanced perspective. I'm going to skip that because I'm low on time. So I hear the shouts from the audience, okay, but I don't want to sell out. I want to be an artist. I don't want to be about the money. I don't want to sell out. But just as a couple of examples, this is Samuel L. Jackson, an actor. Acting is a form of art. We all know him kind and well. And he, for his side job, sells credit cards for Capital One. Michael Jordan, the best basketball player of all time, by some definition. If that isn't art, the rule he's following is get the ball in the hoop, not make iconic positions in the air, right? But Michael Jordan sells Hanes underwear as a side business. So maybe these guys have something figured out. Maybe you can keep the purity of it's not about the money, but still find ways to support yourself and get enough money so that you can continue to make art. And one of my heroes in this light is Herman C. Krannert. He is an engineer from the University of Illinois, where I went to school. He made his business in cardboard manufacturing. If you were doing a startup in the 1930s, your startup was innovating on how quickly and efficiently you could create cardboard. All right? And he made quite a bit of money from improving the processes around cardboard manufacturing. So he, when approached by the university to give back money, rather than giving money to the engineering college, he decided to give the money to the art college. And they created the Krannert Center for Performing Arts, which is known as the Carnegie Hall of the Midwest. It's a fantastic performing facility. It's the backbone for drama and the arts at the University of Illinois. Along with the Krannert Art Museum, were funded by an engineer. So, of course, the engineering department is not very happy that their graduate has come back and given his millions of dollars to the art departments. They ask him, well, why exactly is it that you decided to give your money to art instead of engineering? And he said, there will always be more money for engineering. There will always be more money. And people graduating from the university, making a lot of money in engineering, and then coming back and giving that money to engineering. But that's not going to be so much the case for art. And I'd like to stand up and actually support art with my money as opposed to having just another engineering building on this campus. And I decided to go back and look at what buildings have been created on the University of Illinois campus since he made this donation and since he made this statement. The Beckman Institute for Technology, Mechanical Engineering Lab, the Nano and Microbiology Laboratory, the Granger Library for Engineering, the Computer Science Department first expanded the Digital Computer Lab, and now they have the brand new Siebel Center, sponsored with Silicon Valley money. National Center for Supercomputing Applications has a whole new building for themselves. The Genomics Lab has a whole building. This is the Electrical and Mechanical Engineering building, which is being constructed right now. They've built a whole research park for engineering-oriented companies to come in and work at the university. They've even built a hotel to support that research park. And in all of that time, there's only been one building added to the art campus, and this is an amazing building that won an award from the IAA and the DBA. It is the building for the College of Architecture, which typically lands in the engineering college, not in the art college. So if you look around Silicon Valley, we see a lot of new monuments to engineering around here, but where's the new art institutions? Where are they? So they're pretty minimal. And I think this explains to some degree why that's happening. So what can I do? Well, first off, give your time. There are a whole bunch of artists in this town who would love to work with engineers on creating tech art, but it's much harder to find engineers who are passionate about it than artists who are passionate about it. But any ways in which you can give your time in teaching, and especially in teaching and education, and in just creating great art can help. But I'll just be blunt, give money. If you are getting phenomenally compensated through your job, recognize that there are a lot of people out there who are not, and see if there are ways that you can direct some of your paycheck towards artistic organizations and towards the arts in general. And just to give you 3 examples of people who I would put money towards, the Gray Area Foundation for the Arts is doing amazing work in here in San Francisco. If you didn't see the article on them in TechCrunch 2 weeks ago, it really lays out their story and how great their effort is. They're opening a permanent facility in the Mission right now dedicated to tech art, and they've grown that entirely organically through donations and grants. Kodame is another local group that is devoted to tech art. They have a program called Adopt an Artist, where you actually put in money for a specific artist, and then they make specific works for you. So they're connecting people with money to artists who need them to get that artwork created. And finally, MissionBit, who's focusing on education at the younger ages. I think the best way to solve this problem is to educate people across all different disciplines and interests in how to use computers, how to program, and how to utilize technology, so that when they get on later in their life, they're able to apply that technology to whatever discipline they're currently working in. And oh, by the way, get your company to buy artwork in artistic entertainment. That really, really helps. If you guys are having parties at your big startups, if you are having art installed on the walls, that's a great way to do it. So just to close, I'm sorry I'm over here. Where is this intersection, right? I just rambled about a bunch of stuff with art and tech and artists and technologists and their differences. You know, where is this magical place that Apple refers to? And as I thought about it, I looked back at that picture that Tim Cook tweeted out, and I saw the answer hidden in the picture. It's not like a 3D photo. And are there the Mac Rumors guys here? Because these guys like pick out when there's a model of an Apple thing behind Dr. Dre. I mean, they're crazy. What's the secret? It's right there. It's the people. It's not the place, it's the people. And using the street signs confuses it because it makes it seem like it's a location, but it's not about where you are. It's about the people you're working with and how they come together to create great things. And that's why every time people speak the doom of the end of Apple and it's over since Steve Jobs is gone, you have to recognize that they have the most amazing people in the world, and they have them structured together in a way that enables incredible creative work to come to light. And that's what we see in Apple products. So really, I think arriving at the intersection is not so much about a place, but it's about finding the right people and collaborating effectively with them to make great things. My name is Josh Michaels. You can follow me on Twitter at JoshJet. I've got more talks online at joshjet.com. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.